When former NHL player Chris Chupp was first diagnosed with ALS last year and given 2 to 5 years to live, he went on a search for answers beyond his neurologist's office. Chupp traveled to Salt Lake City last fall to attend an alternative medicine conference on how to manage his incurable disease. That's where he first heard about chelation therapy, a process where people take drugs that draw out heavy metals from the body. Everyone at the conference says you should get tested for heavy metals and then remove them, Chupp says of chelation. That's a big thing with ALS, but I haven't done it yet. I'm sorta on the fence. There's currently no evidence that chelation therapy works for ALS, despite sectors of the wellness industry that claim it does. And ALS is just one of several conditions the procedure is being recommended for. A search on the website GoFundMe turns up dozens of results showing people raising money to try chelation to fix multiple ills, from Lyme disease to Alzheimer's to autism. A federal report in 2016 found that roughly 60 million Americans spend around $30 billion per year on alternative therapies, including chelation. If you're curious about it, here's what you should know. What is chelation therapy exactly? In chemistry, chelation refers to a process where compounds bind with heavy metals. Accordingly, in chelation therapy, people diagnosed with poisoning from exposure to lead, mercury, arsenic, and other toxic metals are given specific compounds over a period of weeks or months, often through an IV, to help the body get rid of the poison. These prescription compounds, with names like dimercaprol, edetate calcium disodium, and succimer, adhere to the metals circulating in a person's bloodstream and are flushed out through urine. The first chelators were developed in the 1930s, widespread use picked up in the United States after World War II to treat naval workers exposed to lead paint. The FDA currently authorizes some chelators to treat people with different types of severe metal poisoning, which can happen from a sudden and intense ingestion, like what happened to children in Flint, Michigan, when the city allowed lead to leach into the water supply, or over long periods of chronic exposure. Alternative practitioners will say it's not normal to be exposed to those things, so any amount of exposure is not okay. But a small amount of exposure is not poison. Is chelation therapy safe? Most forms of chelation are generally considered safe, but it's an intense process. Some people who receive it can spend months hooked up to IVs. Good minerals, like calcium, can also be flushed out with the bad metals, causing side effects like kidney and liver failure and anemia. And when chelation is done incorrectly, by confusing chelating agents with each other or not monitoring a patient's levels of essential minerals, there can be devastating consequences. The CDC reported that 3 people, 2 of them children under 6, died between 2003 and 2005 from improperly administered chelation therapy. Is chelation therapy ever necessary? It's likely that many people seeking chelation wouldn't be diagnosed with metal poisoning if they visited a toxicologist. We're all exposed to certain metals in our environment, says Anne-Michelle Ruha, Vice Chair of the Department of Medical Toxicology at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. She lists dust, soil, and seafood as potential sources of exposure for an average person. Alternative practitioners will say it's not normal to be exposed to those things, so any amount of exposure is not okay. But a small amount of exposure is not poison, she says. While it's true that exposure to contaminants like lead can have serious problems for vulnerable people, specifically children, there are many uses for chelation therapy that are not backed by science. Gwyneth Paltrow's infamous lifestyle blog Goop has run a handful of articles on heavy metal poisoning, slapping the label, speculative but promising, on some of these pieces. In an interview with Goop, one wellness doctor lists conditions including obesity, autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and heart disease that have been proposed to be affected by heavy metals, claims that have little to no proof in peer-reviewed medical literature. A medical toxicologist, and science, will say if you're alive on this earth, you're going to have a small amount of exposure to heavy metals that is not a cause for concern, Ruha says. Ruha is also a member of the American College of Medical Toxicology, which has officially advised against chelation therapy for any conditions except metal blood poisoning. The organization also cautions that chelation therapy can have significant side effects and may cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The government has also taken action against alternative medicine doctors prescribing chelation. In 2018 and 2019, the Justice Department filed at least 3 separate suits against doctors in Texas and Georgia, accusing them of treating patients for a variety of illnesses with chelation and then falsely billing Medicare, collecting millions of dollars in the process. So, is there any benefit to chelation therapy? There might be. In 2002, Gervasio Lamas, MD, currently the head of Columbia University's Division of Cardiology at Mount Sinai in New York City, launched the most robust clinical trial of chelation therapy to date, which he says he started to disprove that chelation worked. "I'd been hearing about chelation since I was a medical student," Lamas says. "Everyone knew it was BS. I thought I'd use clinical methodology to put it away." To his and the larger medical community's surprise, the study, published in 2013, showed that people with heart problems who received chelation had modestly better health outcomes than those who got the placebo. Meanwhile, a subset of people who had both heart issues and diabetes saw a 41% reduction in cardiovascular incidence following chelation. The study shocked the medical community and made Lamas a temporary outcast among mainstream doctors. But his work caught the attention of the National Institutes of Health, which is funding a $37 million follow-up study. Lamas says the medical community's refusal to even consider studying chelation goes against best scientific practice. "It is a visceral dislike of the unknown," he explains. "People have really dug in their heels and are neglecting really robust epidemiological data that's out there." On the other hand, he says he's skeptical about chelation's overuse without more data. "There are no cure-alls," Lamas says. "Some people just feel bad, and they end up getting chelation, and most of them don't get better. They'll just have less metal in them. What if I do have metal poisoning?" Medical toxicologists like Ruha prescribe chelation relatively rarely, and only following tests that show a certain level of heavy metals in the bloodstream. Alternative practitioners often use more sensitive urine tests, which toxicologists have repeatedly criticized as giving misleading results, to diagnose the presence of metals. The most effective way to heal a person with heavy metal toxicity, Ruha says, is to remove them from the source of the exposure, replacing lead pipes, for instance, or moving out of a house with peeling lead paint. What's the bottom line? Ruha speculates that practitioners who offer chelation therapy are monetarily motivated. "The people who are doing these therapies can make a lot of money," she explains. "You can pretty much diagnose anyone with being poisoned." The takeaway is that chelation therapy is a very specific use for people with significant heavy metal poisoning. It's not proven for any other condition, and it has potentially serious side effects and a hefty price tag. You should consult your doctor about whether this is something you need. As for Chup, he isn't sure if he'll pursue chelation, or other alternative therapies. Ultimately, he's on the hunt for the same things many people are. "I'm looking for doctors that just think outside the box in terms of treatments," he says. "Doctors who, have some hope."